The tray in front of me was still full when the whole mess hall went quiet. Draven Kosh had just slammed his fist on the human girl's table, and the sound cracked through the room like a snapped cable. I froze with a piece of food halfway to my mouth. Everyone froze. Nobody moved when Draven moved, because Draven Kosh was the strongest cadet in the entire academy, and strength was the only law that mattered here. My name is Kale Vorin. I am Zethari, which means I am built taller and heavier than most species in this galaxy, with skin that can shrug off a blade and reflexes trained since birth. I am not weak, but standing near Draven still made my spine go tight, because everyone knew what happened to cadets who made him look foolish in front of others, and somehow, without lifting a finger, the new human girl had made him look foolish. Her name was Mira Ashgrove. She had transferred in 3 weeks earlier, one of the first humans allowed to study at the Ethereum Interstellar Academy, and until this exact moment, almost nobody had spoken to her. Humans were new to the wider galaxy, short-lived, physically unimpressive by every measurement the Academy used to rank its cadets. The instructors placed her in the lowest combat tier without even testing her, because the file on her species said enough on its own. She looked up at Draven now, calm, her food tray untouched, her hands resting flat on the table like she had all the time in the world. "You didn't answer me," Draven said, his voice low and dangerous, in the way that usually made people apologize immediately. "I said move. This table is for cadets who matter." Mira tilted her head slightly, like she was studying a puzzle rather than a threat. "There are 11 empty tables in this hall," she said. "You picked mine on purpose." A ripple went through the room. Nobody spoke to Draven like that, not even cadets twice her size. "I should tell you now, before anything else happens, that I did not expect what came next. None of us did. We had been taught since our first day at this academy that humans were the weakest species allowed through the gates. Fragile bones, short lifespans, no natural weapons, no natural armor, nothing except stubbornness and tools. The kind of species you protect, not the kind you fear. I was about to learn how wrong that lesson was. Draven's jaw tightened. He leaned down, putting his face close to hers, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that I should look away, the same way you look away before an accident you cannot stop. "Careful," he said. "I could break every bone in your hand before you even saw my arm move." Mira didn't flinch. She didn't lean back. She simply said, very quietly, "You could try." The mess hall held its breath. For a moment, I actually believed I was about to watch something terrible happen to her. Draven's reputation in the sparring rings was not exaggeration. He had gone 3 full seasons without a single loss. He had put cadets from stronger, more dangerous species into the medical wing without breaking a sweat. Compared to him, a human girl with no special training and no augmentations should have been nothing. A formality, an afterthought. But something in the way she sat there stopped him. He straightened up instead of striking her, muttering something about not wasting his effort on someone so far beneath him, and stormed off toward his own table, his friends trailing after him like nervous shadows. The hall slowly came back to life, conversations restarting in hushed, excited whispers. I stayed where I was, staring at the girl who had just done the impossible. She had made the Academy's strongest bully back down, without lifting a single finger. I decided, right then, that I needed to understand what I had just seen. My roommate, a lanky, quick-witted cadet named Owen Blake, dropped into the seat across from me a moment later, eyes wide. "Did you see that?" he said. Draven backed off. Draven never backs off. "I saw it," I said. "She's human," Owen said, like that explained everything and nothing at the same time. "Humans don't do that. Humans apologize. Humans get out of the way." I didn't answer him, because I was still watching Mira across the hall. She had gone back to eating, completely unbothered, as if the confrontation had already left her mind entirely. No shaking hands, no glancing over her shoulder, no sign at all that she had just stood up to someone capable of ending a fight in half a second. That detail bothered me more than anything else. Fear is instinct. Every species I had ever studied showed some flicker of it when facing a stronger opponent, some small tell in the eyes or the breath. Mira showed nothing. Either she did not understand the danger she had been in, or she understood it completely and simply did not consider it a danger at all. I decided to watch her more closely after that day. It was not difficult. The academy was enormous, spread across training halls, dueling arenas, simulation decks, and lecture rooms built to accommodate a dozen different species at once, but cadets tended to cross paths in predictable patterns. I began noticing small things about Mira that nobody else seemed to register. She moved differently than other humans I had read about. Economical. Every step, every gesture seemed to use exactly the amount of effort required, and nothing more. When she carried her equipment across the courtyard, she never seemed to strain, even under loads that should have been difficult for someone her size. When she sparred in basic drills, which she was required to attend despite being placed in the lowest tier, she performed exactly well enough to avoid attention. Not good enough to stand out, not bad enough to be mocked. A perfectly calculated middle ground. At first, I thought I was imagining a pattern where none existed. Cadets like to gossip, and gossip breeds imagination. But then came the incident during a routine gravity drill 3 days later, and I stopped doubting myself entirely. The drill was simple in theory. Cadets crossed a suspended platform while instructors adjusted gravity settings randomly, testing balance and reaction time. A cadet named Tom Whitfield, a heavier-set student from a low-gravity homeworld, misjudged a sudden shift and slipped from the platform. It happened fast, too fast for most of us to even process what was happening before it was already over. Mira was 3 platforms away. She should not have had time to reach him. I know the physics of that hall. I have run those drills myself. There was no path that got a person from her position to his position before he hit the safety net below, not without inhuman speed. She reached him anyway. One moment she was standing calmly at her station, and the next she had crossed the distance and caught his arm, steadying him back onto the platform before the net even had time to engage. The whole thing happened so quickly that half the room seemed to miss it, assuming Tom had simply caught himself. But I saw it. I saw the blur of motion, the precision of her grip, the way she released him the instant he was stable and immediately returned to her original position, as if she had never left it at all. When the instructor asked what happened, Mira said only that Tom had regained his own balance. She said it so plainly, so without hesitation, that even Tom seemed confused enough to simply agree with her rather than argue. I caught up with her afterward, in the quiet corridor outside the training hall, my curiosity finally outweighing my caution. "That was you," I said. "You caught him." She looked at me for a long moment, calculating something I could not read. "He caught himself," she said. "I saw the distance you crossed," I said. "Nobody crosses that distance in that amount of time. Not without training most cadets here have never even heard of." For the first time since I had started watching her, something shifted in her expression. Not fear, not embarrassment, something closer to caution, like she was deciding how much of the truth I deserved to hear. "You're observant," she said finally. "Most cadets aren't." "I'm careful," I corrected. "There's a difference." She almost smiled at that. Almost. "Keep being careful, Kale," she said, using my name even though I did not remember telling it to her. "It will serve you well." Then she walked away, leaving me standing in that corridor with more questions than I had started with. Over the following days, I began quietly researching everything the Academy's library had on human history, hoping to understand what I had witnessed. Most of what I found matched the dismissive tone I had been taught since childhood. Humans were described as a young species, recently accepted into the wider galactic community, notable mainly for their short lifespans, physical fragility, and surprising technological adaptability given their limited natural advantages. But buried deeper in the historical archives, past the polished summaries meant for young cadets, were fragments that told a very different story. References to a homeworld with no shortage of predators larger and faster than any human. Records of conflicts that had shaped their species long before they ever left their own solar system. Conflicts fought without the benefit of natural armor, claws, or size. Notes describing a species that had somehow endured, generation after generation, through nothing but adaptability, coordination, and a refusal to stop trying even when every physical advantage belonged to something else. It was strange reading those old fragments. The Academy taught us that humans were weak because they lacked what other species had. It never seemed to consider what humans might have built instead, forged over countless generations of surviving against odds the rest of us had never truly faced. I found myself thinking about Mira differently after that. Not as a fragile new student, placed in the lowest tier by mistake, but as someone who had chosen, very deliberately, to appear far less capable than she actually was. The question I could not answer yet was why. Meanwhile, Draven's mood had not improved. If anything, the encounter in the mess hall had made him worse. Cadets whispered that he had lost his temper twice in training that week, throwing sparring partners harder than the drills required, snapping at instructors who dared correct his form. His pride, the foundation of everything he was at this academy, had taken a crack it could not easily repair. I saw him watching Mira from across the courtyard one afternoon, his expression unreadable, calculating. I did not like the look on his face. It was the look of someone deciding how to reclaim something he believed had been stolen from him, regardless of the cost. I did not yet know how far he would go to get it back. But I remember standing there, watching him watch her, and feeling a small, cold certainty settle into my chest. Whatever was coming next was not going to be small. Draven Kosh did not know how to lose quietly, and Mira Ashgrove, whoever she truly was beneath the calm surface she showed the world, did not seem like the kind of person who would let herself be pushed without eventually pushing back. The Academy had spent 3 weeks underestimating her. I had a feeling that mistake was about to become very expensive for someone. The alarm rang out during third-period combat theory, sharp and sudden, cutting through Instructor Vantis's lecture on tactical retreat. Every cadet in the room straightened at once. Alarms during class hours never meant something small. Training accident in Hall 9, the announcement said. All medical personnel report immediately. Hall 9 was the advanced sparring ring, reserved for cadets in the top combat tiers. Draven trained there every day. My stomach tightened before I even had a reason to connect the two things. Instructor Vantis dismissed the class early, and I moved with the crowd toward Hall 9, curiosity and a strange, nagging worry pulling me forward faster than I intended to walk. By the time I reached the observation deck above the ring, a small crowd had already gathered, pressing against the glass to see what had happened. Draven stood in the center of the ring, breathing hard, his practice armor scorched along one shoulder. Across from him, a cadet named Dax Miller lay against the ring's padded wall, conscious but clearly shaken, one arm held awkwardly against his chest, while medical staff knelt beside him. I felt Owen appear at my side, his expression grim. Draven requested Dax as a sparring partner, Owen said quietly. Everyone knew it was a bad idea. Dax barely qualifies for that tier. Why would Draven pick someone weaker than himself? I asked, though some part of me already suspected the answer. Owen's jaw tightened. Because he's been losing his temper all week, and everyone stronger than him has learned to avoid sparring with him until he calms down. Dax was the only one left who couldn't say no. Below us, an instructor was speaking sharply to Draven, gesturing at Dax, clearly displeased. Draven stood with his arms crossed, unrepentant, muttering something about Dax not defending himself properly. It was the kind of excuse that meant nothing and satisfied no one, least of all the instructor delivering the reprimand. I watched Dax get carried out on a stabilizing stretcher, and something settled uncomfortably in my chest. Draven had always been aggressive in the ring. That was simply his nature, and the Academy had always tolerated it, because strength earned tolerance here. But this felt different. This felt like someone unraveling, taking his frustration out on whoever happened to be nearby. And I understood, with growing unease, exactly where that frustration had come from. Word of the incident spread through the Academy by evening, twisted and exaggerated the way stories always are when they pass from cadet to cadet. By the time it reached the dormitory wing, some versions claimed Dax had nearly been seriously hurt, others claimed Draven had been provoked, and a few, quieter versions simply said what I already believed to be true. Draven Kosh was looking for someone to make an example of, and he had chosen the weakest available target because his pride would not let him challenge anyone capable of fighting back properly. I found Mira later that evening in the Academy's east courtyard, sitting alone on a low stone bench beneath the artificial evening light the Academy used to simulate a planetary sunset. She was reading something on a small handheld display, unbothered by the cold that had begun settling over the courtyard as the temperature cycle shifted. "You heard about Hall 9, I said, sitting down a respectful distance away. "I heard," she said, without looking up. "Dax will recover. Bruised ribs, mostly. Nothing permanent." "You already checked?" "I like to know things," she said simply. I studied her for a moment, trying to read whatever calculation was happening behind her calm expression. "Draven is unraveling," I said. "Everyone can see it. He picked a fight with someone who couldn't properly defend himself because he's still angry about what happened in the mess hall 3 weeks ago." Mira finally looked up from her display, meeting my eyes directly. "You've been paying attention," she said. "That's good. Most cadets here only notice strength when it's aimed directly at them. I've been paying attention to you, specifically," I admitted, "ever since the gravity drill." Something flickered across her face, brief and unreadable. "I told you to be careful, Kale. Not curious." "They're the same thing from where I'm standing," I said. "I've read what little the Academy Library actually admits about human history. It doesn't match the way the instructors talk about your species. It doesn't match the way anyone here treats you." Mira set her display down on the bench beside her, folding her hands together, considering me with an expression I had not seen from her before, something closer to genuine attention. "What did you find?" she asked. "Fragments," I said. "Records buried under summaries meant for young cadets. Mentions of a homeworld with predators larger and faster than your entire species could naturally compete with. Records of conflicts fought without the natural advantages every other species in this galaxy takes for granted. And somehow, despite all of that, your species is still here, still expanding, still finding its way into rooms like this one, into academies like this one, standing beside species that were bred and evolved specifically for combat. That's the version they let cadets see," Mira said quietly. "It's not wrong, it's just incomplete." "Then tell me the complete version," I said. She was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the courtyard, watching the artificial sunset paint long shadows across the stone paths. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed slightly, softer, more distant, like she was recalling something she rarely spoke about out loud. "Every species in this academy was given something," she said. "Claws, natural armor, enhanced reflexes, augmented strength, some advantage built directly into their biology that let them survive their own world's dangers. Humans were given none of that. No claws, no natural armor, no advantage that would show up on a scan or a medical file. What we were given instead doesn't show up as easily." "Which is?" "Everything else," she said. "Every trick, every tool, every strategy a species can develop when it has nothing except its own mind and its own will to keep going. We learned to work together in ways other species never had to, because we needed each other to survive threats none of us could face alone. We learned to adapt faster than almost anything else on our world, because the ones who didn't adapt quickly enough simply didn't survive long enough to pass anything forward. We learned patience and timing, and how to make an opponent's advantage work against them instead of us. None of that shows up on a scan. None of that gets written into a medical file the way claws or natural armor does. But it's there. It's always been there." I sat with that for a long moment, feeling the weight of what she was describing settle over me slowly. "That's why the instructors placed you in the lowest tier," I said, "because your file only shows what's missing. It doesn't show what replaced it." "Most people only see what's easy to measure," Mira said. "Claws, strength ratings, reflex tests. They never think to measure what a species built instead, because it doesn't fit neatly into a chart. Draven measures everything by strength, I said. That's the only language he understands. I know, Mira said, and for the first time, something sharper entered her voice, something that sounded almost like resolve. That's exactly why he's going to keep pushing until he learns a different one. I felt a chill at that, though I could not fully explain why. What do you mean? I mean he's not going to stop, she said. Not after the mess hall, not after Dax. His pride won't let him stop until he's proven, to himself and to everyone watching, that he's still the strongest cadet in this academy. And the only way he'll believe that proof is if it comes from beating someone who embarrassed him in the first place. You, I said quietly. She nodded once, calm and certain, as if she had already accepted something the rest of the academy hadn't figured out yet. He's going to challenge me eventually, she said, publicly and formally, because that's the only kind of victory that would satisfy him. And when he does, I won't be able to decline. Academy honor codes don't allow it, not once a challenge is issued in front of witnesses. I thought about the Academy's dueling regulations, rules I had studied, but never expected to matter this directly to someone I knew. Honor challenges were rare, reserved for serious disputes between cadets, sanctioned by instructors, and fought under strict safety protocols in the main arena. Declining a formal challenge carried consequences severe enough that almost nobody ever refused one, regardless of the risk. You could be seriously hurt, I said. Draven has never lost a sanctioned duel, not once, in 3 full seasons. Mira looked at me then, and for just a moment, something shifted behind her calm expression, something old and quiet, and utterly unafraid. Kale, she said gently, how many of those 3 seasons do you think he spent fighting someone who was actually trying? I did not have an answer for that. I did not think anyone at the academy did, because nobody had ever considered the question worth asking. Draven's dominance had always been treated as simple fact, an unquestionable truth built into the hierarchy of the school itself. Nobody had ever imagined an opponent who might treat that dominance as something to be tested rather than feared. Over the following days, tension around the academy grew thicker. The way pressure builds before a storm nobody wants to name out loud. Draven's temper remained volatile, his training sessions growing more aggressive, his patience with his own allies wearing thinner by the day. Cadets began quietly avoiding him in the corridors, the same way they avoided open flame or exposed wiring, sensing danger without needing to understand its exact shape. I spent those days watching Mira in the training halls with new eyes, no longer trying to catch her in some hidden display of ability, but trying instead to understand the shape of what she had described to me. I noticed the way she studied every opponent before engaging them, reading their habits before their strength. I noticed the way she conserved her effort in every drill, never revealing more than the minimum required, patient in a way that seemed almost inhuman given how young her species was to this galaxy's broader stage. I began to understand that patience itself was the advantage, not speed, not strength, the willingness to wait, to observe, to let an opponent reveal themselves completely before ever showing your own hand in return. Draven, I realized, had never learned that kind of patience, because he had never needed it. Every opponent he had ever faced revealed themselves through force, through direct confrontation, through the simple, straightforward language of strength against strength. He had no experience reading an opponent who refused to play by those rules. The confrontation came on a gray afternoon, 8 days after the incident in Hall 9, during a mandatory academy assembly meant to address rising tensions among the senior cadets. Commander Alric Stone, the academy's senior officer, stood before the gathered students, addressing recent disciplinary concerns in a measured, formal tone that most cadets only half listened to. Draven stood near the front of the assembly, arms crossed, jaw tight, clearly still simmering from whatever private frustration had been building inside him for over a week. When Commander Stone finished speaking and opened the floor for any formal cadet business, a heavy silence fell over the hall, the kind of silence that comes right before something irreversible happens. Draven stepped forward. "I have a formal challenge to issue," he announced, his voice carrying easily across the assembly hall, steady and deliberate despite the anger simmering just beneath its surface. "Sanctioned. Full honor terms." Commander Stone's expression remained neutral, though I saw something careful enter his posture. "State the terms, cadet." Draven turned, slowly, deliberately, until his gaze landed directly on Mira, seated calmly near the back of the assembly, among the lower-tier cadets. "Mira Ashgrove," he said, loud enough that every cadet in the hall heard her name spoken like a verdict. "I challenge you, full arena terms, no restrictions beyond standard lethal force boundaries." A wave of murmurs swept through the hall, disbelief and excitement tangled together in equal measure. Nobody expected Draven to issue a formal challenge against someone in the lowest combat tier. It was almost unheard of, a mismatch so severe that some instructors immediately began whispering among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. I turned to look at Mira, half expecting to see fear finally break through her calm exterior. Instead, she rose slowly to her feet, meeting Draven's gaze across the length of the assembly hall without a trace of hesitation. "I accept," she said, her voice carrying just as clearly as his had. The hall went utterly silent. Commander Stone hesitated, glancing between the two of them, clearly weighing the severity of what he was about to authorize. Formal challenges could not be declined once accepted, and given the enormous gap in combat tier ranking, this pairing bordered on something the Academy's own regulations rarely anticipated. But honor codes were honor codes, and the challenge had already been issued and accepted in front of the entire senior class. "The challenge is recorded," Commander Stone said finally, his voice heavy with something between duty and concern. "The duel will be held in 3 days' time, in the main arena, under full observation. Both parties are expected to prepare accordingly." Draven turned and walked back toward his seat without another word, a satisfied, almost cruel expression settling over his face, as though the outcome had already been decided in his mind. I looked at Mira instead, still standing near the back of the hall, calm and composed, her eyes following Draven's retreating figure with an expression I struggled to fully read. Not anger, not fear, something closer to quiet, patient certainty, the look of someone who had simply been waiting for this exact moment to finally arrive. 3 days, I thought. 3 days until the Academy would finally learn what it had spent months refusing to see. I did not know, sitting there in that silent assembly hall, just how completely that lesson was about to unfold. The 3 days before the duel felt longer than any month I had spent at the Academy. Word of the challenge spread across every dormitory, every training hall, every corridor, until it seemed like the entire student body had organized itself around a single question. How badly would Draven Kosh humiliate the human girl who had dared to embarrass him? Betting pools formed quietly among the cadets, the way they always did before major duels, though this time the odds were almost comically lopsided. Most cadets placed their confidence entirely with Draven, some out of genuine belief in his skill, others simply because the alternative seemed unthinkable. A handful of cadets, mostly the ones who had watched Mira closely over the past weeks the way I had, quietly kept their opinions to themselves. Owen found me in the dormitory the evening before the duel, dropping into the chair across from my desk, with the restless energy of someone who had spent all day listening to gossip he didn't fully believe. "Everyone's saying it's going to be over in one exchange," he said. "Some cadets are saying Draven should hold back so it doesn't look too one-sided." "Draven doesn't hold back," I said. "He never has." "You still think she has a chance," Owen said, studying my face carefully. "Don't you?" I thought about the corridor conversation, about patience and adaptability, about a species that had survived on nothing but its own persistence. I thought about the courtyard, about the quiet certainty in Mira's voice when she described exactly how this challenge would unfold, days before Draven had even issued it. "I think," I said slowly, "that everyone at this academy has been measuring the wrong thing since the day she arrived." Owen didn't have a response to that. He just sat there, quiet, turning the thought over in his mind, the same way I had been turning it over in mine for days. Sleep did not come easily that night. I lay awake replaying every detail I had gathered about Mira since the mess hall confrontation, every small moment of impossible speed and calculated restraint, trying to piece together what tomorrow might actually look like. Some part of me feared for her, despite everything she had told me. Draven was not simply strong, he was trained, disciplined in his own violent way, and utterly without mercy toward anyone he considered beneath him. If Mira's confidence was misplaced, even slightly, the consequences would be severe. Morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of weather the Academy's climate systems produced whenever tension ran high enough to affect even the machinery meant to control it. By the time I reached the arena, the stands were already filling with cadets, instructors, and a handful of visiting dignitaries who had apparently heard about the mismatch and decided it was worth witnessing in person. The arena itself was a massive circular structure, built to accommodate the full range of species enrolled at the Academy, its floor reinforced to withstand impacts far beyond what any single cadet could typically produce. Overhead, transparent barriers separated the fighting floor from the surrounding stands, thick enough to contain stray energy discharge or debris without obstructing the view. I found a seat near the front, close enough to see every detail, and settled in beside Owen, who had claimed the spot next to mine an hour earlier just to guarantee we sat together. Commander Stone stood at the edge of the arena floor, flanked by two senior instructors, reviewing the formal terms of the duel one final time before the fight began. Medical staff waited at a discreet distance, equipment ready, the way they always were for sanctioned duels involving significant tier gaps. Draven entered first, to a wave of enthusiastic applause from a large portion of the assembled crowd. He wore his full combat plating, polished and gleaming, moving with the confident, almost theatrical stride of someone who had already decided how this story would end. He raised one arm to the crowd, soaking in their approval, before turning to face the arena's opposite entrance with an expression of open contempt. Mira entered a moment later, and the applause died down into a quieter, more uncertain murmur. She wore simple training gear, nothing reinforced, nothing designed to withstand significant impact, the standard equipment issued to lower-tier cadets who were never expected to face serious combat. She walked calmly to the center of the arena, stopping at the marked distance opposite Draven, her expression as unreadable as it had been every day since I first noticed her. Commander Stone stepped forward, addressing both combatants in a formal, measured tone that carried clearly across the silent arena. "This is a sanctioned honor duel, full arena terms, standard lethal force boundaries in effect," he announced. "Both combatants have accepted these terms freely. The duel concludes upon surrender, incapacitation, or a ruling from arena officials. Do both parties understand and accept these conditions?" "Understood," Draven said, his voice ringing with confidence. "Understood," Mira said simply. Commander Stone glanced between them one final time, something careful and searching in his expression, before stepping back toward the edge of the arena floor. "Before we begin," he said, addressing Mira directly, "arena regulations require that I ask if you wish to reconsider the terms of this engagement, given the recorded tier disparity between combatants." The crowd leaned forward slightly, expecting Mira to hesitate, to show some flicker of doubt now that the moment had finally arrived. She did not. "I have one question," she said instead, her voice calm and clear enough that every cadet in the stands heard it. "What are the exact boundaries for lethal force in this engagement?" A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. Commander Stone's expression shifted slightly, though he answered without hesitation, his tone still formal and precise. "Lethal force boundaries permit any technique that does not result in permanent injury or death," he said. "Incapacitation, restraint, and controlled force are all within acceptable limits. Any technique exceeding those boundaries will result in immediate disqualification and disciplinary action." Mira nodded once, as though she had simply been confirming something she already suspected. "Understood," she said again. "I'm ready." I felt Owen shift uneasily beside me. "Why would she ask that?" he murmured. "Why does that matter to her right now?" I didn't answer him, because I didn't fully understand it myself yet, though something about the question unsettled me more than I expected. It wasn't the question of someone afraid of losing control. It was the question of someone confirming exactly how much control they were about to be allowed to use. Commander Stone raised one hand, signaling both combatants to their final positions, before stepping fully clear of the arena floor. "Begin," he said. Draven moved first, and he moved fast. I had watched Draven spar dozens of times over my years at the academy, had seen him overwhelm opponents with sheer explosive force before they even had time to register the exchange had begun. This was no different. He closed the distance between himself and Mira in a fraction of a second, a powerful driving strike aimed directly at her center, the kind of opening move meant to end lesser duels before they truly started. Mira wasn't there when the strike landed. I don't mean she dodged in any way I could clearly follow. One moment she stood directly in front of him, and the next, she was simply somewhere else, a step to the side, her posture completely unbothered, as though Draven's opening strike had been nothing more than a polite suggestion she chose to decline. The crowd gasped, a single collective sound rippling through the stands. Draven recovered quickly, pivoting into a second strike, then a third, each one faster and more aggressive than the last, driven by a growing frustration I could see building in his movements even from a distance. Every single strike found empty air. Mira moved with an economy of motion I had never witnessed from any cadet at this academy, regardless of species, shifting only exactly as much as necessary to avoid each attack, conserving every ounce of effort as though she had all the time in the world. "She's not even trying to hit him back," Owen whispered beside me, disbelief evident in his voice. "She's reading him," I said quietly, remembering our conversation in the courtyard. "She's letting him show her everything before she shows him anything." Draven's strikes grew more erratic as the engagement continued, frustration bleeding into every movement. He was no longer fighting with the calculated precision that had won him 3 unbroken seasons of victories. He was fighting with rage, the same rage that had driven him to injure Dax Miller in the training hall, the same rage that had been building since the mess hall confrontation weeks earlier. And rage, I realized as I watched the duel unfold, was exactly the mistake Mira had been waiting for. The shift happened so quickly that I almost missed it entirely. Draven launched another driving strike, overcommitting his weight the way he had begun doing several exchanges earlier, and this time, instead of simply stepping aside, Mira moved directly into the opening his overcommitted stance had created. Her hand closed around his extended arm with a speed and precision that seemed almost impossible given everything the Academy's files claimed about human physical limitations. And in a single fluid motion, she redirected his own momentum against him, turning his forward charge into an uncontrolled stumble. Draven's balance broke completely. He hit the arena floor hard, the impact echoing across the silent stands, his combat plating scraping loudly against the reinforced surface. For a moment, nobody in the entire arena made a sound. Draven pushed himself up quickly, anger replacing whatever shock had briefly registered on his face, and charged again, faster this time, more desperate, as though sheer aggression alone might somehow reverse what had just happened. Mira met his charge with the same calm economy of motion she had shown from the very first exchange, sidestepping his advance and using his own forward momentum to redirect him a second time, sending him stumbling past her toward the arena wall. He caught himself before impact, spinning around, breathing hard now, his confident posture from the beginning of the duel completely gone, replaced by something far more uncertain. "She hasn't struck him once," Owen said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not once, this whole time." I realized he was right. Every single exchange had ended the same way, Draven attacking, overcommitting, and Mira redirecting his own force against him rather than meeting it directly. She hadn't thrown a single strike of her own. She was simply letting Draven defeat himself, one increasingly desperate exchange at a time, while conserving every bit of her own effort in the process. It was, I realized with a chill, exactly the strategy she had described to me in the courtyard days earlier. Patience, adaptability, letting an opponent's own strength become the very thing that unravels them. Draven seemed to sense, finally, that something had gone deeply wrong. He hesitated for the first time since the duel began, his breathing ragged, his eyes searching Mira's calm expression for some explanation he clearly couldn't find. "What are you?" he said, low enough that only those closest to the arena floor could hear it. "What are you doing?" "Learning your patterns," Mira said simply. "You've shown me 3 of them already." Draven's expression twisted into something between fury and disbelief. He surged forward one final time, abandoning whatever remained of his earlier caution entirely, driven purely by the need to end this humiliation before it could grow any worse. I watched Mira's posture shift for the first time since the duel began, subtle but unmistakable, the calm patience of the previous exchanges sharpening into something far more deliberate. The crowd around me leaned forward as one, sensing, the same way I did, that whatever came next would be the moment the entire academy would remember for the rest of its history. Commander Stone stepped slightly closer to the edge of the arena floor, his expression unreadable, as Draven's final charge closed the distance between them in the span of a single heartbeat. What happened next unfolded so quickly that even now, replaying it in my memory, I struggle to separate each individual moment from the blur they became in real time. Draven's final charge carried every ounce of strength and desperation he had left, a strike meant to finally overwhelm whatever advantage Mira had been using against him for the entire duel. I saw his shoulder drop, his weight shift fully forward, committing everything to a single, decisive blow. Mira didn't step aside this time. She stepped into him instead, closing the distance he had opened, her movement so precise it looked almost gentle, despite the speed behind it. Her hand caught his extended wrist, redirecting the force of his own charge downward and sideways in one continuous motion, while her other hand found a pressure point along his shoulder that made his entire arm go momentarily slack. Draven's massive frame, easily twice her size, folded forward from the redirected momentum, and Mira used that exact moment, that single fraction of a second where his balance belonged entirely to her control, to pivot behind him, sweep his stabilizing leg out from beneath him, and guide his fall toward the arena floor with a controlled, deliberate motion that looked less like combat and more like a demonstration. He hit the ground hard, the impact echoing through the silent arena, but the fall itself wasn't what ended the duel. Before Draven could even register what had happened, Mira had already dropped with him, one knee pressed lightly against his upper back, his own arm pulled into a controlled restraint hold behind him, immobilizing him completely without a single strike landing anywhere on his body. The entire exchange, from the moment his final charge began to the moment he lay pinned beneath her, had taken less than 3 seconds. I sat frozen in my seat, along with what felt like the entire arena, unable to process the speed and precision of what I had just witnessed. Draven Kosh, undefeated for 3 full seasons, the strongest cadet the Academy had produced in recent memory, lay completely restrained on the arena floor, unable to move, unable to fight back, defeated by someone the school's own records had listed as physically inferior in every measurable category. Nobody spoke. Nobody clapped. The silence stretched on so long that it became its own kind of sound, heavy and disbelieving, pressing down over the entire stadium. Draven struggled against the hold for a moment, his face pressed against the arena floor, humiliation and disbelief bleeding into every strained breath. "Let go of me," he snarled, his voice muffled but still carrying enough fury to reach the front rows. "Do you surrender?" Mira asked calmly, her voice carrying easily across the silent arena despite its quiet, even tone. Arena regulations require a clear verbal declaration. "This isn't over," Draven growled, still struggling uselessly against the restraint. "It is," Mira said, patient but unmoving. "You have no leverage, no angle of escape, and every additional second you struggle only risks unnecessary strain on your shoulder. I would prefer not to cause that, but the choice is yours." Something about the calm, almost gentle way she said it seemed to finally break through Draven's remaining resistance. He stopped struggling, his body going still beneath her controlled hold, though his expression remained twisted with anger and disbelief. "I surrender," he said finally, the words clearly costing him something enormous to speak aloud. Commander Stone stepped forward immediately, his voice cutting through the stunned silence with practiced authority. "Duel concluded. Surrender declared. Release the hold." Mira released Draven instantly, rising to her feet in one smooth motion and stepping back to a respectful distance, giving him space to recover on his own terms. She did not gloat. She did not look toward the crowd for validation. She simply stood there, calm and composed, exactly as she had been standing before the duel had even begun. Draven pushed himself up slowly, his combat plating scraped and dented from the fall, his pride visibly shattered in a way none of us had ever imagined possible. He stood there for a long moment, staring at Mira, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that looked uncomfortably close to fear. "How," he finally managed, his voice barely audible even in the silent arena, "how did you do that?" Mira studied him for a long moment before answering, her expression softening slightly, though nothing about her posture suggested weakness or hesitation. "You attacked the same way every time," she said. "Overwhelming force, aimed directly at whatever seemed weakest in front of you. That works, against opponents who only know how to meet force with force. I don't fight that way." "That's not an answer," Draven snapped, some of his earlier anger returning despite his obvious exhaustion. "It's the only one that matters," Mira said simply. "You spent 3 seasons undefeated because nobody here ever tested you properly. I did." The crowd around me had begun to stir, quiet murmurs spreading rapidly through the stands as cadets turned to each other, trying to process what they had just witnessed. I heard fragments of conversation drifting past me, disbelief mixed with something like awe, the entire social hierarchy of the academy visibly reorganizing itself in real time. Owen sat beside me, completely silent, staring at the arena floor with an expression I had never seen on his face before. 3 seconds, he finally said. It took her 3 seconds. Less, I said quietly, still trying to process everything I had just watched. I don't think she needed the full 3. Commander Stone moved to the center of the arena floor, addressing both combatants with the same formal authority he had used at the beginning of the duel, though something in his tone had shifted, more careful now, more measured. "The duel is officially recorded as concluded," he announced. "Cadet Ashgrove is declared the victor under full honor terms." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavier than any applause could have made them. I watched Draven's face as Commander Stone spoke, watched the exact moment the reality of what had happened fully settled over him. He was not simply defeated. He had been outmatched so completely, so effortlessly, that the entire foundation of his identity within this academy had crumbled in the span of a few brief exchanges. Medical staff approached to check his shoulder, though he waved them off initially, still staring at Mira with an expression I couldn't fully name. Something between resentment and a dawning, uncomfortable understanding that the world he had believed in, the simple hierarchy of strength that had always placed him near the top, had just been proven far less solid than he had ever imagined. Mira turned to leave the arena floor, her expression calm, unreadable, betraying none of the disbelief still rippling through the crowd around her. But before she reached the arena's edge, she paused, turning back toward Draven one final time. "You fought exactly the way you were taught to fight," she said, her voice quiet enough that only those closest to the arena floor could hear it clearly. "That's not a flaw, it's just incomplete. You've never had to learn anything else because nobody here has ever forced you to." Draven said nothing, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the arena floor rather than on her. Mira held his gaze a moment longer, then turned and walked calmly out of the arena, leaving behind a silence so complete that it felt like the entire building itself was holding its breath. I sat there for a long time after the duel officially ended, watching the crowd slowly disperse in hushed, disbelieving clusters, everyone replaying the same 3 seconds over and over in their minds, trying to make sense of something that fundamentally contradicted everything the Academy had ever taught us about strength, about hierarchy, about what made a species dangerous or safe. Owen finally broke the silence beside me, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "Everything we've been taught about humans," he said slowly. "It's wrong, isn't it?" I thought about the fragments I had found buried in the Academy's archives, about a species that had survived without claws, without natural armor, without any advantage that would ever show up clearly on a medical scan. I thought about patience and adaptability and the quiet, unshakable resolve I had seen in Mira's expression from the very first day she stepped into that mess hall. "I don't think it's wrong," I said slowly. "I think it's incomplete, the same way Draven's fighting style was incomplete. We've been measuring the wrong things this entire time." Owen didn't respond immediately, his eyes still fixed on the now empty arena floor, the weight of what we had both just witnessed settling slowly over him, the same way it was settling over me. I did not know it then, sitting in that quiet, disbelieving arena, but the events of that single duel were about to change far more than the Academy's social hierarchy. They were about to change the way every species within these walls understood the newest members of the wider galactic community entirely. And somewhere deep in my mind, a single unsettling thought had already taken root, one I would carry with me long after that afternoon had ended. If this was simply what one human cadet, still early in her own training, was capable of showing us in a single sanctioned duel, I found myself wondering, with a chill I couldn't quite shake, exactly how much more her species might still be keeping quietly hidden beneath the surface. The days following the duel felt like living inside a completely different academy than the one I had known for years. Draven's reputation, once the unquestioned pillar of the entire senior class hierarchy, had collapsed almost overnight. He still attended his classes, still trained in the sparring halls, but the confident, commanding presence that had once followed him everywhere was gone, replaced by something quieter, more guarded. Cadets who used to seek his approval now simply avoided him, not out of the same old fear, but out of something closer to awkward uncertainty, unsure how to treat someone whose entire identity had been built around a strength that had just been proven far less absolute than everyone believed. I saw him alone in the training yard, 3 days after the duel, running solo drills long after most cadets had already left for the evening meal. I almost walked past without stopping, but something made me pause at the edge of the yard instead, watching him move through a series of basic strikes with none of his usual aggressive confidence. He noticed me eventually, pausing mid-drill, his expression guarded. "Come to gloat?" he asked, though there was less bite in his voice than I expected. "No," I said honestly. "I came because I've been thinking about something, and I thought you might be thinking about it too." He studied me for a long moment before setting down his practice weapon, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "What is there to think about?" he said. "I lost, in front of the entire senior class, to someone the Academy ranked in the lowest combat tier." "That's the part everyone's stuck on," I said, "but I don't think it's the important part." "Then what is?" I thought carefully about how to answer that, remembering the courtyard conversation, remembering everything Mira had explained about patience and adaptability, and the quiet, invisible strength her species had built over countless generations, without any of the natural advantages every other species in this academy had been given. "You lost because you only know one language," I said finally. "Force against force. It's worked for you every single time, because every opponent you've ever faced spoke that same language back to you. Mira doesn't. She never has. And until 3 days ago, nobody here ever forced you to learn anything else." Draven's jaw tightened, though he didn't immediately dismiss what I was saying, which surprised me more than anything else in that conversation. "She told me something similar," he admitted quietly. "After the duel ended, I didn't want to hear it then. Do you want to hear it now?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the practice weapon in his hands, something shifting slowly behind his guarded expression. "I've never lost before," he said finally. "Not once, in 3 full seasons. I didn't know what it would feel like. I thought it would feel like failure. Doesn't it?" "No," he said slowly, as though the realization surprised even him as he spoke it aloud. "It feels like I've been standing still this entire time, thinking I was moving forward because nobody ever stopped me long enough to notice." I didn't have a response to that, not immediately, but something about the honesty in his voice made me believe, for the first time since I had known him, that Draven Kosh might actually become someone different because of what had happened in that arena. Word of the duel had already begun spreading well beyond the academy itself. I learned, through overheard conversations among the instructors, that several senior officers from the wider Concord Military Command had requested full recordings of the engagement, citing concerns about outdated assessments regarding human combat capability across multiple training institutions. What had started as a single, deeply personal confrontation between 2 cadets was quickly becoming something much larger, a conversation the entire galactic community seemed suddenly eager to have. I found Mira again, about a week after the duel, sitting in the same courtyard where our first real conversation had taken place, the artificial evening light casting the same long shadows across the stone paths. She looked up as I approached, offering a small, knowing smile that told me she had been expecting this conversation eventually. "You've been busy," I said, sitting down beside her. "Word travels fast," she said simply. "Draven's different now," I said. "Quieter. I think he's actually trying to understand what happened, instead of just being angry about it." "That's good," Mira said, and she seemed to genuinely mean it. "I didn't do this to humiliate him, Kale. I did it because he needed to understand, clearly and completely, that strength measured only one way eventually meets something it can't explain." "Is that why you accepted the challenge?" I asked. "Even knowing the risk?" She considered the question carefully before answering. "I accepted because I understood exactly what I was capable of, and exactly what he wasn't. There was very little actual risk involved, despite what everyone in that arena believed." "The instructors didn't know that," I said. "The whole academy didn't know that. Your file says you're one of the weakest cadets here." "My file measures what's easy to measure," she said, echoing the words from our first real conversation. "Claws, natural armor, raw strength ratings. It's never been designed to measure what my species actually is." "Which is?" I asked, finally ready to hear the full answer. Mira looked out over the courtyard for a long moment, considering her words carefully. "We're not strong the way other species in this galaxy define strength," she said. "We never have been. What we are is relentless. Every single one of us descends from countless generations of ancestors who faced threats far more dangerous than anything a natural advantage could fully protect against, and somehow, every single time, enough of us found a way to keep going. Not through claws, not through natural armor, through cooperation, through adaptation, through a refusal to simply accept defeat as the final answer, no matter how overwhelming the threat in front of us seemed. That's what Draven never learned," I said slowly, understanding settling over me the same way it had in the arena, though more completely now. "He's never had to be relentless. He's never had to adapt, because brute strength has always been enough." "Exactly," Mira said, "and it's not his fault. It's simply what this academy taught him to rely on, because it's what every measurable advantage in this galaxy has always rewarded. Until now." I sat with that for a long moment, watching the artificial sunset continue its slow, familiar arc across the courtyard sky. "The instructors are already talking about restructuring the tier assessments," I said. "Officers from the Concord Command are requesting the full recordings. This is bigger than just you and Draven now." "I know," Mira said, and something in her voice suggested she had known it would become this large from the very beginning. "It needed to happen eventually. My species has been underestimated since the moment we joined this community. Someone was always going to have to prove, clearly and undeniably, that the measurement itself was flawed. "Why you?" I asked. "Why now?" She considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Because Draven made it personal," she said simply, "and because I was tired of watching an entire academy assume that fragile and weak meant the same thing. They don't. They've never meant the same thing. My species is fragile, Kale. We break easier than almost anyone else in this galaxy. But we are not weak. We never have been. Fragile things that refuse to break completely, that adapt and endure and find new ways forward every single time the odds turn against them, eventually become something far more dangerous than anything built purely from natural advantage." I thought about the Academy's archives, about the fragments buried beneath the polished summaries meant for young cadets, about a species that had survived against threats none of us could fully imagine, using nothing but persistence and the refusal to simply give up. "What else is your species hiding?" I asked quietly. "Beneath the fragile files everyone assumes tell the whole story." Mira looked at me then, something unreadable flickering behind her calm expression, an answer that felt both complete and deliberately incomplete at exactly the same time. "You'll find out eventually," she said. "Everyone does, sooner or later. We've always been more than what our files say. The galaxy is only just beginning to understand exactly how much more that truly means." I didn't press her further that evening. Some answers, I was learning, needed time to fully reveal themselves, the same slow, patient way Mira herself had revealed her true capability to an entire academy that had spent months assuming they already understood everything worth knowing about her. In the weeks that followed, the academy changed in ways both large and small. The old tier assessment system, built entirely around measurable physical traits, was quietly revised to include new evaluation criteria, ones that finally began accounting for adaptability, strategic patience, and the kind of quiet resilience that never showed up clearly on a simple medical scan. Draven, to his credit, began training differently, seeking out sparring partners who fought unfamiliar styles, forcing himself to learn the kind of patience and adaptability he had never needed before. He and Mira never became close, not in any way most cadets would have recognized as friendship, but something like mutual respect grew slowly between them, built from that single unforgettable duel neither of them would ever forget. As for me, I found myself thinking often about that first afternoon in the mess hall, about the calm, unshaken way Mira had faced down the strongest cadet in the entire academy without a single visible flicker of fear. I understood now what I hadn't understood then, that fear response I had been searching for, the one every other species instinctively showed when facing overwhelming strength, had never been missing from her at all. It had simply been replaced, generations ago, by something else entirely, something quieter, more patient, and ultimately far more dangerous than fear could have ever been. The Academy had spent months measuring humanity by the wrong scale, assuming fragile meant weak, assuming short-lived meant simple, assuming the absence of claws and natural armor meant the absence of anything worth fearing at all. It took exactly 3 seconds in a single arena to prove, clearly and completely, exactly how wrong that assumption had always been. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet certainty had settled in that would stay with me long after I graduated from that academy, long after Draven Kosh became a cautionary tale whispered among younger cadets, long after Mira Ashgrove's name became legend across every training institution in the wider Concord. We had only seen the smallest fraction of what her species was truly capable of, and the rest of the galaxy, whether it was ready or not, was about to find out exactly what that meant.